This lesson, we're going to be looking at a JavaScript method called RequestAnimationFrame. And what this is going to do is this is going to allow us to have a method that allows our browser to understand that we've got an animation frame. And essentially what that does is it allows you to loop through multiple times within that same function. And the way that it works, we've got an example here on the Mozilla Developer Network. They've got start to equal to null. Then we've got our element there. So whatever that element is that we want to animate, it's making a selection from the HTML. And then using a timestamp, so down below, it initiates that function window request animation frame. And we know with Windows methods, we don't need to specify window, but it's always a good idea to do that anyway. So sometimes you might see the request animation frame without the window prefixing it, and that's okay as well. And in this case, we are going to be using window request animation frame to request our animation frame. And what it does is it invokes a function, and the function that's going to invoke is going to be over here. We've got it running on a timestamp. So in this particular example, it's going to be moving that element around, and depending on how far this progress is and tracking the current timestamp and the value minus start, it's going to be transforming that particular element. So this is a really neat example, and you can go ahead and you can try this out for yourself. And we're going to bring the request animation frame into our application and add it into our application, making animations happen. So setting up a brand new function, and then this is the function where all the magic is going to happen. We're going to call this play game, and this is the function that we're going to request. So with the console log in play, and once we hit that start button, so we've got the start function, this is where we want to invoke the request animation frame. So using the window object and then request animation frame. All we need to do is specify what the function is that we want to request, and the function that we want to request is the play game function. So now let's see what happens. So we hit start and we have in play. So it's not exactly looping quite yet, and you see that what's happening here is that within the animation frame, they're requesting that animation frame again, and that's what actually creates the loop of the animation. So just as any function that we're invoking within itself, it's going to constantly loop and create additional animation frames. So we've only got one animation frame that we're animating right now, and now we're going to invoke that same function within itself. And what that's going to do, when we go back out here and we start it, we see that we've got an animation happening. So now we can also check to see that if the game is in play. So let's set up a variable. We'll call it player. So this is going to be a blank object. And once we start the game, then we're going to take our player object, set start to true. And then in our animation frame, we're going to take our player object start, and we're going to make sure that that is true. So we're not going to do anything unless the game is actually started and in play. And we're not going to request any additional animations or anything unless this function is true. And really at the end of the day, it's not going to make much difference because we are setting the player start to be equal to true before we're calling the play game. And that's why we don't see any difference quite yet. So now that we've got that in play, the next part of this is to add in that animation and make something move. So what we need to do is we need to create an element that we can access and we can move around our screen. So going into our game area, this is where we want to place that particular element. So we've got the game area object that we created earlier, and we're going to use JavaScript to generate our car or our vehicle. So setting up a variable, we can call it car. In document, creating an element. So in this case, we're creating an element, and the element that we're going to create is a div. And then adding into car, I'm going to update the inner text. And for now, it's just going to say car inside of it. And then using that game area object, we're going to append a child to it. And the child that we're appending is the car. We're appending a child, and currently right now, we still have the class of display none being shown, and we need to hide the start screen. So that's the next function that we need to do as well within the start area. So once we start the game, we can get rid of the console message now because we're not going to have that in use anymore. So taking the start screen, selecting class list, we're going to remove a class from it, and the class that we're removing is hide. And also what we want to do for game area is we're going to select class list, and in this case we're going to add the class of hide. And actually I just got that opposite, so we want to add hide to the start screen and we want to remove hide from our game area. So let's try that one more time. So now we've got that element that we've created. You can take a look at it, and this is the one that we're actually going to be moving around. So that is still yet to come in the upcoming lessons. So I'll show you how to do that, how we're going to make car, that element that we created, move depending on the arrow keys. So that's still to come in the upcoming lesson. Try out RequestAnimationFrame, add it into your project. So when the game starts, you've got an animation that's playing and you've got a function that's handling all of the gameplay.